Williams is one of the great Formula One teams. Despite its recent troubles, it's still fourth on the all-time winners list with 114 Grand Prix victories. We all like a good list, especially me, so here are the top 10 Williams F1 drivers.
Gentlemen, a short view back to the past.
Number 10, Riccardo Patrese. Patrese just pips Carlos Reutemann to this 10th spot. The reason for that, partly its longevity, but also it's difficult to forgive Reutemann for his complete capitulation at the 1981 season finale that allowed Nelson Piquet's Brabham to win the Drivers' Championship. He also then left the team after just 2 races of 1982. After a one-off drive in 1987, Patrese joined Williams full-time for 1988 alongside Nigel Mansell. The car that year, the Williams Judd, wasn't particularly good, but things got better when Renault arrived for 1989. Patrese was partnered with Thierry Boutsen. Patrese took victory in the 1990 San Marino Grand Prix, but he was perhaps at his best the following season when Nigel Mansell returned. Patrese actually had the edge over Mansell for much of the season, in qualifying at least, even though it was Mansell that eventually put the championship challenge together against McLaren's Ayrton Senna. Patrese was never as comfortable in the all-singing, all-dancing active suspension FW14B in 1992 and was blown away by Mansell. However, he did finish second in the Drivers' Championship to follow up his third from the year before, helped Williams towards the Constructors' crown, and had definitely done his bit before going to Benetton for 1993. Number 9, Ralf Schumacher. Now, Michael Schumacher's brother is often a little bit forgotten when it comes into F1 history. He was actually a very good F1 driver, and perhaps no more so than in 1999, in the year when he blew away Alex Zanardi at Williams and also took on the faster McLarens and Ferraris, and really should have won at least one Grand Prix. He certainly deserved to win. He was one of the outstanding performers that year. He then compared favourably to rookie Jenson Button in 2000 before starting his tumultuous relationship with Juan Pablo Montoya in 2001. Schumacher actually compared quite favourably to Montoya initially, although the Colombian did eventually get the upper hand as time went by. A crash in Indianapolis for the US Grand Prix ruined Schumacher's 2004 campaign, but he still ended his Williams time with 6 wins for the team. And that actually puts him 7th on the team's all-time wins list, and he's the highest scoring non-champion, so worthy of his place on this list. Number 8, Juan Pablo Montoya. Separating Montoya and Ralf Schumacher on this list was actually quite tricky, as they were quite evenly matched, but in the end Montoya scored more poles and more points, although Ralf did get more wins, but Montoya just edges ahead on those points. It's probably fair to say that Montoya was also more exciting, more of a Williams driver, a real racer, taking the fight to Michael Schumacher's Ferrari from the earliest opportunity, and most famously at the 2001 Brazilian Grand Prix when he dived down the inside into the first chicane and shoved the Ferrari towards the grass. Montoya was far from error-free, but he was fast, he was exciting, and he was certainly a real battler. And he managed to put together a 2003 title campaign when Ferrari had a bit of a wobble between its dominant 2002 and 2004 cars. In the end, his championship challenge was scuppered by a slightly controversial accident at the US GP. The Williams BMW Montoya package wasn't quite enough to take a championship, but they got closer than most during a period of utter domination from Ferrari and Michael Schumacher. Number 7, Jacques Villeneuve. Perhaps ironically, Villeneuve's least impressive season at Williams was the year in which he managed to take the title. In 1996, when he came across from IndyCar, as a rookie he compared favourably with Damon Hill, even though Hill won the championship, and in 1998 he dealt very well with not one of Williams' best cars and completely destroyed Heinz-Harald Frentzen. In 1997, Williams had, thanks to Adrian Newey, his last Williams car, the 4th most dominant car in its history. Some bad luck, errors and a fantastic campaign from Michael Schumacher at Ferrari meant that the season really went on a bit longer than it should have done in championship fight, but Villeneuve did enough at the controversial Jerez finale after Schumacher tried to take him out when he went for the lead. Villeneuve made it to the end to secure that title. There were some impressive performances in 1998, but really things fizzled out then for Williams as Villeneuve moved to BAR for 1999. Number 6, Alain Prost. After being sacked by Ferrari in 1991, Prost took a season out of Formula One to come back and engineer himself into a seat at Williams Renault, which of course at that time was very much the benchmark team. In fact, the FW15C of 1993, with all the gizmos honed from the FW14B, is the most dominant Williams in terms of raw speed of any car in the team's history. Now, it's perhaps fair to say that Prost was past his best at this point, and a lot of people probably remember that season as the one in which Ayrton Senna scored some fantastic victories, most notably at Donington, of course, in the wet for McLaren. But actually, Prost was a comfortable champion. He took 7 wins and 13 poles on his way to his 4th crown before retiring from Formula One for good, at least as a driver. He didn't really push Williams forward. It was very much a drop in, win the championship and go, so he couldn't really get higher up on this list, but ultimately he did win the title with Williams. Probably worth saying at this point that this isn't a list of the greatest drivers that ever sat in a Williams. There is no Ayrton Senna on this list, and clearly he would be if that was the case. He only started 3 races and of course sadly didn't win any of them before being killed at Imola in the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix. So it's no disrespect to him that he's not on this list. It's really about the amount of time they were there at the team and the success they scored. Number 5, Nelson Piquet. Now, it's probably fair to say that Piquet was also past his best by the time that he got to Williams, having already won 2 world titles with Brabham, and he joined for 1986 and thought he was the number 1 driver at Williams. That was tested somewhat by the pace of Nigel Mansell in the other car, and a road accident for Frank Williams meant that perhaps Piquet didn't get the support that he was expecting, and things got a little bit fraught. Actually, in 1986, both Mansell and Piquet were quite evenly matched, and they took points off each other and allowed Alain Prost to nick the title at the Adelaide finale when, of course, Mansell had his spectacular tyre blowout and Piquet was brought into the pits for fresh rubber just to be safe. The intra-team battle continued in 1987, but really it was much more one-sided. After Piquet had his enormous crash at Tamburello, he wasn't really quite the same, and Mansell was quicker almost every race. Nevertheless, Piquet kept picking up points, and Mansell had some fairly typical dramatic bad luck despite his sensational win at Silverstone, and it was actually Piquet that led the championship going into the last few rounds. When Mansell injured his back in a spectacular Japanese Grand Prix practice accident, Piquet was confirmed as champion for the last couple of races before he then headed to Lotus for 1988. Number 4, Keke Rosberg. A swashbuckling improviser, Rosberg was probably the perfect person to step in when Alan Jones announced his shock retirement ahead of the 1982 season. He might have been something of a last-minute choice, but Rosberg really delivered with the FW08. The 1982 season was one of the most dramatic, controversial, tragic, ridiculous in F1 history, and Rosberg only took 1 victory. But then again, no one else took more than 2, and he was very much a worthy champion as he thrashed his Cosworth DFV engine Williams while up against all the turbocharged cars from chiefly Renault and Ferrari. The turbo revolution was really underway by 1983 and Williams were left standing a little bit, but Rosberg still managed to take a brilliant victory, one of the best wet weather race wins I believe, at Monaco when he started on slick tyres and still took the lead early on anyway. The 1984 FW09 was the first Williams turbo car, and the Honda was something of an on-off switch. In fact, that car made my list of top 10 worst cars to win a Grand Prix thanks to Rosberg's efforts at a sweltering Dallas. The FW10 of 1985 was much better, and Rosberg took another couple of victories before heading to McLaren for his final F1 campaign. Number 3, Damon Hill. Hill was never really meant to be the team leader, but he ended up being the Williams team leader for 3 seasons. After proving his worth as a test driver, Hill joined the race team for 1993 alongside Alain Prost and duly learned his craft with 3 victories. He was then partnered with Ayrton Senna for 1994, so again the understudy role, but was thrust into the team leader role when of course Senna was killed in that San Marino Grand Prix accident. Very much like his father in 1968 who had to take up the cudgels for Lotus after Jim Clark's death, Damon rallied the troops and the Williams improved during the course of the year. It didn't really look like a championship contending car for Damon at the start of the season, but Williams developed it and Damon really stepped up his game with the FW16B in the second half of the season. And of course he took his brilliant, probably his best drive in the 1994 Japanese Grand Prix, a win in the wet against Schumacher to take the championship fight down to the Adelaide finale where of course Schumacher drove into him to win the title. So Damon was denied, but he'd very much proved his worth, at least to the outside world at that point. 1995 was a bit more fraught. The car was better, but Damon and David Coulthard, his new teammate, made errors. And actually, Michael Schumacher at Benetton was able to take the title quite comfortably. It's during that campaign where Patrick Head and Frank Williams decided that they needed a change for 1997. Before that, though, Hill put together his finest F1 campaign, winning half of the 1996 races in his favourite racing car, the FW18, to comfortably take the championship. He also finished with 21 wins for Williams, which is second on their list behind just one driver who we'll be getting to shortly. Number 2, Alan Jones. the straight-talking, no-nonsense Australian was really the template for what a Williams Grand Prix driver should be, at least in the eyes of Patrick Head and Frank Williams. The three of them really formed the early days of Williams with the FW06 in 1978, Jones starring on a few occasions before Patrick Head produced the FW07 and Jones became a Formula One front runner. A self-professed racer rather than a qualifier, he always tended to bring his best out on a Sunday. Jones managed to win 4 races in the closing stages of 1979 to set himself up for a successful title attack in 1980 when he defeated Brabham's Nelson Piquet. And it was, of course, Williams' first championship success. He probably should have been the person to score their first Grand Prix success as well, but he had a car failure at the 1979 British Grand Prix, which allowed Clay Regazzoni, another candidate for this list that didn't quite make it, to take that all-important milestone success. So misfortune, the odd error and strained relationship with Carlos Reutemann hampered Jones's efforts in 1981, even though arguably he drove even better and he missed out on the crown. He did, however, win the season finale just before retiring from Formula One. Now, I think he probably retired a little bit too soon. In fact, of course, he did try and come back again later, but had he hung around with Williams in 1982, it's very easy to believe that he would have been able to do the same sort of thing that Keke Rosberg did. And that would, of course, made him a double world champion for Williams, and perhaps he'd be remembered a little bit higher up the list of all-time great F1 drivers. Number 1, Nigel Mansell. Not always the easiest driver to work with, Mansell was nevertheless a real charger, a real racer, very much in the Jones mould. And really, he kind of ticked all the boxes for Patrick Head and Frank Williams. They didn't particularly enjoy necessarily having the arguments with him outside the car, but they knew when they plugged him in, he would deliver for them. And he delivered more than any other driver in Williams' history. After 4 lean years at Lotus, Mansell joined Williams for 1985 and almost immediately became a front runner. Over the next 9 years, he would rack up 28 victories for the team, putting well ahead of Damon Hill on this list in terms of successes, and also, of course, that 1992 world title. He narrowly missed out in 1986, should have won it in 1987, in my opinion, and then actually put in some fantastic drives with Williams Yard in 1988. Of course, he headed to Ferrari for 1989 and 90, but returned for 1991. And Williams' improvement in form was almost instant. Okay, it was the right time. The Renault had been a good engine for a couple of years. Adrian Newey was just coming into his own. And of course, the gizmos of the FW14B were just around the corner. But really, Mansell was a galvanising force and took the 1992 title with some ease. He also came back, of course, for a few cameo races in 1994, where he was perhaps past his best. But nevertheless, once again, his feedback with the team, sometimes to the annoyance of Damon Hill, was listened to almost immediately. And he did win his final Grand Prix for the team at Adelaide. So, while Jones probably set the template for what a Williams Grand Prix driver should be, Mansell was the one that really nailed it, scored the most wins, and of course, it's probably that iconic image of him in Red 5 that is the one that most Williams fans will remember. If you like this video, please do let us know in the comments. Tell me what I got wrong, put your own top 10 perhaps, and let us know what other top 10s you'd like us to do in future. Please remember to click that like button and subscribe, and take a look at motorsport.tv for any great motorsport videos.